My own conclusions after 53 years of study and investigation are that some so-called UFOs are intelligently controlled extraterrestrial spacecraft.
The name Stanton Friedman has become synonymous with the term flying saucer. His unwavering point of view and determination for not only finding but also revealing the truth has made him iconic in the field of ufology. Stanton, or Stan as he prefers to be called, was born on July 29, 1934 in Elizabeth, New Jersey, next to his hometown of Linden, a working-class town 18 miles southwest of New York City. His grandparents immigrated from Eastern Europe between 1900 and 1905. He attended Linden High School from 1947 to 1951 and was valedictorian of his class at age 16. It was during this time that Stan acquired some of the most important tools he would need for his life's work.
I certainly didn't realize it at the time, but my high school career, 4 years at Linden High School in Linden, New Jersey, did prepare me for my activities as a UFO investigator, as a lecturer, as somebody defending truth and liberty and all that stuff. I was on the debate team my freshman, sophomore, and junior years. We won a state championship. And one thing about debating, you have to learn to handle both sides of the argument because you never know which way you're going to go when the tournaments come up. And also, you have to get your facts straight. You can't make up things. It's sort of against the rules.
During his senior year, there was no debate team, and Stan went into drama, performing in 2 plays, perhaps a foreshadowing of his years on stage as a speaker.
Now, if you'd told me that I'd wind up spending my life lecturing about flying saucers, I'd have laughed my head off.
He attended Rutgers University from 1951 to 1953 on a tuition scholarship and earned his expenses as a busboy during the summers in the Catskills. He obtained a scholarship to the University of Chicago, where he attended from 1953 to 1956 and received his Bachelor's of Science degree in 1955 and then his Master's degree in Physics in 1956. He and the famous Carl Sagan were classmates during those years. In 1958, Stan was employed as a nuclear physicist for the General Electric Aircraft Nuclear Propulsion Department near Cincinnati, Ohio. Stan served 14 years in this role, and one day, while mail ordering books through a mail-order bookhouse in New York, he needed one more book so that he would not have to pay shipping fees.
And there was one, the Report on Unidentified Flying Objects by United States Air Force Captain Edward Ruppelt.
This is how his fascination for the UFO phenomenon began. He went on to work for other companies such as General Motors, Westinghouse, TRW Systems, Aerojet General Nucleonic, and McDonnell Douglas, where he worked on advanced classified programs on nuclear aircraft, fission, fusion rockets, and compact nuclear power plants for space applications.
And then I stumbled across Project Blue Book Special Report number 14 in about 1960 at the University of California, Berkeley Library. And I was astonished because it hadn't been mentioned in any of the 15 books that I had read. And it not only provided me with tons of data, and I'm a data hound, I'll admit it, information on 3,200 sightings, 240 charts, tables, graphs, maps, data heaven. But it also had the press release that the Air Force issued, and that shocked me because it proved, once you looked at the data as I had been, that the Air Force was lying about the results of their study.
In 1970, Friedman left full-time employment as a physicist to pursue scientific investigation of UFOs.
First met Betty and Barney Hill in November 1968. I've spent a great deal of time since then investigating their abduction.
The 1961 case of Betty and Barney Hill became the focus of Stan's research. Convinced of the authenticity of their claims, Friedman met the Hills and interviewed them in depth. He co-authored the book Captured, The Betty and Barney Hill UFO Experience, with Betty Hill's niece, Kathleen Martin, and it is the complete story of what really happened and the effects on all involved.
It seems clear to me that Betty and Barney Hill were taken on board a flying saucer in New Hampshire in 1961. His story must be taken at face value. It's true.
Stan was also instrumental in the authentication of the Betty Hill star map.
The star pattern makes sense from nearest star to nearest star to nearest star. The sun is part of the pattern. Quite remarkably, every one of the stars in the pattern is the right kind for planets and life. And all of the right kind of stars for planets and life in this volume of space are part of the pattern. More than 24 people in New Mexico associated with the UFO-related events of July 1947 have been interviewed. We have verified every statement made by Jesse Marcel.
As the original civilian investigator of the Roswell incident, Stan has spent countless hours on research and many years pursuing government disclosure.
I was working on classified programs. I understand national security and how it works and so forth. But they were outright lying. That got my dander up. I later visited Project Blue Book many times. But that really began a 40-year quest now for the truth about flying saucers. I think I found it.
Bringing this case to the public's attention has been one of his most passionate pursuits. His discipline and persistence when investigating the Majestic 12 documents led to some of the best evidence relating to their authenticity.
After 5 years of research, Mr. Friedman published this report. Final report on Operation Majestic 12. And now with us here tonight on UFO Controversy to talk about his findings is Stanton Friedman, my special guest. Welcome to the show.
Glad to be back.
How do you know for certain these documents are genuine?
I suppose you'd have to say I don't. What I have concluded in the report, after exhaustive investigation, which includes time at the National Archives, the Library of Congress Manuscript Division, the Truman Library, the Eisenhower Library, the Kennedy Library, a lot of other places, what I know is that to date, none of the arguments made against their genuineness have stood up.
In 1968, Friedman told a committee of the U.S. House of Representatives that, quote, "The evidence suggests that Earth is being visited by intelligently controlled extraterrestrial vehicles," end quote. That was 45 years ago. And since then, Stan, who is a dual citizen of Canada and the U.S., has lectured at more than 600 colleges and hundreds of professional groups in all 50 United States, 10 Canadian provinces, and 18 other countries, in addition to various nuclear consulting efforts. He has published more than 90 UFO papers and has appeared in many documentaries and on hundreds of radio and TV programs, including Larry King and Nightline.
Also here in Washington is Stanton Friedman, a physicist who's been involved in nuclear space and research for such companies as General Electric, Westinghouse, and General Motors. Mr. Friedman, there are books, there are magazine articles, there are television interview programs which have very little time, such as this one. Give it your best shot. If you are seeking to convince the skeptical, what do you point to?
I'm seeking to convince the healthy agnostics. The skeptics don't want to listen to the data in my findings. I point to the 2,400 plus landing trace cases, physical changes in the environment collected from 65 countries. I point to the 3,200 cases in Project Blue Book Special Report 14, 20% of which couldn't be explained and had all the characteristics we attribute to flying saucers. I point to the 3,500 pilot sightings collected by a NASA scientist on the West Coast. I point to Bud Hopkins' 140 abductees with a waiting list of 200, and an enormous amount of data in the form of documents, some of them obtained from the government directly, some not so directly, clearly indicating that our planet is being visited, that some UFOs are alien spacecraft, and that we are indeed dealing with a cosmic Watergate.
Stan has his share of critics, but remains unaffected by the criticisms.
Have I pleased everybody? I certainly have not. That's the price you pay. I had a father-in-law who said, when you're playing bridge, if you don't get set once in a while, you're not bidding high enough. So if you can't stand the heat, as Harry Truman said, get out of the kitchen. I can stand the heat, and I will continue to do it as long as I can.
This is just a minuscule fragment of an over 50-year body of work. A look through the smallest of keyholes at a man who has dedicated his life to research and educating the public on the facts and information regarding disclosure and science as it relates to the UFO phenomenon. It is Stan's sense of purpose that drives him, a purpose that is about creating a better world for all and a oneness in humanity.
And I've made a real effort to educate lots of people with a concern about how do you get at truth, B, a willingness to stand up and be counted when you've done your homework, and C, a recognition of how important it is, if you can do something that helps society, to do it. Don't hold back. Do I think the world is a better place for my contribution to it? Tough question. I'd say yes. How do you measure it? I don't know.
We also think the world is a better place because of his immense contribution. That is why the 2013 International UFO Congress is awarding Stanton Friedman with this year's Lifetime Achievement Award.
Your 2013 Lifetime Achievement Award winner, Stanton Friedman. Would you like to put it there and say a few words?
Yes.
Haven't you already said enough?
Thank you, Lee. Thanks to Open Minds. Thanks to all of you who are here. And that rather extensive work done on that intro. There are a lot of people to thank for my life. My mother, I suppose. Without her, I wouldn't be here. I want to say a comment, too, about somebody who set me on the right path way back in the 5th grade. Rose Gutkin was our 5th grade teacher in Linden. And one day in class, she had a science class, and she was telling us that the solar system, the sun sits still and the planets revolve around the sun. And it just so happens that the day before, in our brand new 29-cent a volume encyclopedia that you bought at the grocery store, I'd read an article about the whole solar system moving around the center of the galaxy at 12 miles a second. Wow, that was fast. So I spoke up. No, Miss Gutkin, I just read that this is the way it was. And she gave me a hard time. No, I've got it right here in the book. I didn't sass teachers, but the next day I brought in the encyclopedia. And she grudgingly admitted that perhaps that was right. I learned a very important lesson. If you're going to take on authority, you better have facts in hand before you open your mouth. That stood me in good stead in the debating business, in industry. I've had a busy life, living in different parts of the country. It didn't move the way I would have expected to. Like some of you, you may have found out that people usually went to work for a company and spent the rest of their life there. My dad worked for the same company for 37 years. Several of my uncles, same company. When I started work at General Electric, I figured I could retire at age 55. Always be a place at General Electric. 3 years later, I decided to leave. Get out while the getting was good. The whole place was canceled in 16 months. And had a lot of jobs like that. Exciting, important to me, but they went down the tubes. Now, somebody asked me the other day for some kind of an interview, why did you decide to become a full-time ufologist? And I had to think about that. I said, frankly, I didn't. What do you mean? Well, I had planned when I got laid off at Westinghouse, I found another job that sounded like the job of a lifetime. I would be working for McDonnell Douglas Astronautics in California, trying to figure out how flying saucers worked. Now, I couldn't have imagined a more really gutsy kind of exciting activity.
I had lectured about flying saucers, but this was going to be a full-time job. As I was driving across the country, I heard from Pittsburgh to California, I heard on the radio that the Manned Orbiting Laboratory Program, which was financing my work, was canceled. I walked in with my offer letter a couple days later at McDonnell Douglas, and she looks at the paper, she looks at me, you know we just laid off 5,000 people. Yes, I know that. They kept me for 3 months. I suppose they had to keep me for a certain length of time because of the offer. I had another short-term job. I didn't know it was short-term when I took it, but I solved a problem, and that was it. I decided, I've got a family to provide for. I better get to work. So I became a salesman on the phone in the morning because it was cheap to call from California back east before 8 in the morning, looking for jobs as a speaker. Did a mailing to 1,000 colleges, followed up looking for piggyback talks, as I called them, and I was on my way. It was hard work. You can see where being a cheapskate was an important part of my life. That's how I bought Ruppelt's book. That's why I could make calls between 6 and 8 in the morning looking for lectures. But more bang for the buck. That was needed. I grew up in a working class town. Fewer than 20% of the kids went to college. Neighboring towns, some of them 80%. I wasn't too proud to work hard. I actually take pride in having been a union waiter in Chicago at a nice restaurant on the South Side for the 3 years I was in Chicago. Learned a lot about food. Learned a lot about people. Made more money than I would have working over at the physics department, believe it or not. I learned about exotic things like lobsters. I had never seen one until the time somebody ordered one, and he said, "Would you please take it out of the shell?" "Saul," another waiter, "can you help me here?" He did. I had never seen a lobster in or out of the shell. Now I live in New Brunswick where there's loads of great lobster. I do need to thank my wife, Marilyn, 37 years. She's put up with my traveling and being gone and missing important events with our kids. She's tolerated, she doesn't care about flying saucers, my depth of involvement, late night phone calls. You know, when I debated on Coast to Coast Radio from 3 to 6 in the morning, our time, I'm not at my best at that time. But she put up with it. So I hope it was worth it for her and our kids. And I missed some of the growing up of my children, but again, I hope it was worth it. One nice moment, I was giving a talk at a California college, and they asked, "Hey, Stan, would it be okay if we had an interpreter for the deaf on the stage for your lecture?" I said, "Sure." They didn't know I had a deaf daughter who lived in the area. She had never heard me speak, literally. I told her, and she brought a bunch of her friends, and I was very pleased that they were pleased. Life has mysterious things to perform. Anyway, I am grateful to my colleague, Kathleen Marden, with whom I've written 2 books. We've done a lot of other work together writing. You don't often find somebody you can work with so carefully, so casually, so comfortably. Kathy's the gal. And it illustrates the publishing business. One more comment. They sent us the cover of the book, Captured. And I noted that my name was first. And I protested to the publisher. I said, "Look, this is Kathy's book. I only did 15% of the work. Her name should be first." "Stan," he says, "the reason your name is first is because you're better known And the book will sell more if your name is first. Now, what do you say when a guy says that? I talked to Kathy. We agreed it was more important that the book sell than that our egos be satisfied. Strange World Publishing. Strange World Ufology. What I'm hopeful of is that by the time my great-grandson grows up, he will be grateful for what his great-grandfather did, and we will have the answer to this UFO mystery. Thank you very much for the honor you've given me.